Of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, a good understanding of the fascinating world of chess. I am George Merijanian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club at Fitchburg State University. This club meets every Wednesday evening from 7 to 11 in room C-159 in the McKay complex at the university. And with me today at the Fitchburg Access Television Production Center is our award-winning director, Darren Dame of Fitchburg. He's assisted in the control room by fellow resident and two-time Wachusett Chess Club champion Bruce Felton. Behind the camera, following all the action, is longtime Wachusett Chess Club member Brian Bigelow of Fitchburg, former of Leominster. And last but not least, is my longtime associate and trusty co-host, former Wachusett Chess Club champion Martin Lane of Lunenburg, one of the strongest and most active chess players in north central Massachusetts. Hello, Marty.
Hello, George. Good to see you again.
Always a pleasure seeing you, Marty. Well, Marty, today we're going to talk about one of the unsung heroes in chess. And this is a player who might have been, or could have been, world champion 100 years ago if it were not for the interruption of World War I. And we're talking about a player by the name of Akiba Rubinstein. What can we tell our viewers about Akiba Rubinstein?
Well, Akiba Rubinstein was born in the village of Lodz, Poland.
Yes.
His father had been a mechanic.
Yes.
And I think you told me that his father died actually.
Yes,
when he was very
his father
young.
died before Akiba was born.
Yeah, and he was raised by his maternal grandmother.
Right.
And the family wanted him to study to be a rabbi. And he started out on those studies. But then, somewhere around the age of 16, he learned how to play chess. And in that particular village, there was a lot of chess activity, including a very prominent player named Georg Salve.
Yes.
And he recognized Rubinstein's talent right away. And so then he entered a few tournaments, did very well. And he decided...
now here's a photo of a young Akiba Rubinstein.
And he decided to abandon his rabbinical studies and go into chess full time. And he soon became, a top-level player. He was one of a rising young generation of players that included Duras, Spielman, and Jose Raul Capablanca, a great Cuban player. So there were four great players coming up, challenging the old guard of the current world champion then, Emanuel Lasker.
Right.
Tarrasch was still playing. Schlechter was still playing.
Yes.
Teichmann, who was going to be the player in the outside.
This is Richard Teichmann, the German master.
Right. And they represented the old guard, and so by around in that period, 1912 up to 1914, was really the peak year for both Capablanca and Rubinstein, and they were considered to be the likely challengers to Emanuel Lasker for the world title. Now, they didn't pick the world title or the challenges the same way they do today, but you know the story better than I do about why neither match ever came about.
Well, what happened was that Rubinstein challenged Lasker.
Right, after the negotiations with Capablanca fell through.
That's right. He challenged Lasker because Lasker was the champion, and he said, I'm challenging you for the world title. And unfortunately, World War I broke out, which actually it canceled the match. I mean, there was plans to have a match in Potsdam, Germany. Right. That was the setting, and they had come close to reaching the financial arrangement. So everything was all set to go, but World War I intervened and stopped that match.
And Rubinstein didn't play at all during the war years.
No, he didn't. No.
And by the time he picked up again after the war, 1918, he was still a strong player, but he wasn't as strong as he had been.
He wasn't as strong as he had been. Earlier. Right.
And so he continued to play until the early 1930s, maybe 1932.
Well, he actually retired around the early 30s, 1932. I think 1932. Here's a picture of Rubinstein. This is actually he's in his mid years here, and there's a lot of books written about Rubinstein. You'll see this photo of Rubinstein in those books, the collection of his games. Yeah, so he actually retired from chess, but he had problems. He had actually
mental health problems.
He suffered. He was, as is common with people with highly developed intellects, he showed signs of eccentricity.
Right.
You remember? One of the things as far as what he used to do, for example, in playing a game, he would actually, after making his move, get up from the table and go into the corner of the room in the playing room and just wait until his opponent had made his move before he returned to make his move.
And we should say it's fairly unusual for a player to get up after every move. I mean, players will, these games are long, so a player will get up to, get a drink of water or something. But, to get up after every move and not stay at the table, that's unusual.
That's very unusual, right.
So.
He also showed signs of being absent-minded. There's a great story about him. He was playing in a tournament at the hotel where he was staying. He had just finished eating in the dining room. He left the dining room, went through the lounge, and then he came to a door that said dining room. He entered the door, sat down, and ordered a meal, not realizing that he had just already eaten.
Right.
So he had suffered, from absent-minded, a little eccentric.
He didn't like. He was afraid of people. He didn't like to
people. Now, I'm sure our director Darren has actually there's a statue of Akiba Rubinstein. That this is actually in a Polish city.
Polanka-Zdrój.
Polanka-Zdrój in Poland.
Which has had a tournament, the Rubinstein Memorial, was for many years. I think they call it something else.
Now he is buried. Actually, he died in 1961, March of 1961,
in the Netherlands. Yeah.
And he's buried actually in a cemetery outside of Brussels, Belgium. There's also a nice sketch done by his son. He had two sons, Sammy. And this was Sammy Rubinstein did this sketch of his father. This year was 1954. Somewhere in the 1950s, Sammy, his son, did this nice sketch of his father. So Rubinstein definitely, in the first quarter of the 20th century, was considered one of the top players.
He was on a. He was having. He was winning. I think it was 1912. He won 5 international tournaments in a row.
Yes.
I mean, his results.
No, in fact, has anybody done that?
Probably Kasparov is the last one I can think of.
But he won the majority. There was a period where he won a majority of the tournaments he played in. 1907 to 1914 were really his peak years. Yeah. So again, he basically was deprived of an opportunity.
And there, a lot of people speculated that he would have beaten Lasker.
Yes, right, exactly, because he was at his peak.
Right.
I mean, Rubinstein was definitely at his peak.
Right.
Now, we're going to present a game.
Right.
Now, what is the game we're going to present to our viewers?
Well, this comes from 1908. He was playing Richard Teichmann, who was one of those old guard. He wasn't that much old. He was only 14 years older than.
We should have a photo, a couple of photos of Richard Teichmann, the German master. This is a younger Richard Teichmann.
Do you know that he was born in 1868, Christmas Eve, 1868, the same day that Emanuel Lasker was born?
Really?
Yeah.
They were born the same day?
A little bit of chess true, same day.
I never knew that. No. Okay. But he had actually a problem with eye. Actually, he had an eye problem. He had one eye.
Right.
And here is actually a very famous photo of Richard Teichmann.
He was 1899. He was playing in a tournament in London. He had to withdraw after 4 rounds because he was having such eye trouble. Turns out that whatever it was, I never found out. He lost the use of that right eye.
And you speak of London. He had moved from Germany to London.
As a language teacher.
Yeah, he taught languages, foreign languages.
He had studied modern languages in Berlin.
Right, exactly. So he was a very colorful, very strong German master.
Oh, and he's also credited with that, saying that chess is 99% tactics.
That is the most famous quote from Richard Teichmann.
Right.
Yes. So this is, again, from the match, 1908. And who had white in this game?
Okay, Akiba Rubinstein was white.
All right.
And he opened, as he usually did, he was primarily a queen's pawn opening. He opened D2 to D4, the second most popular opening after E2 to E4. And it serves much the same purposes. It's a central pawn, opens up a diagonal for the dark squared bishop, and gives a little bit opening for the queen.
Okay. Now, isn't there a threat of white, if white is able to put another pawn on the center?
Yeah, if he can move the E2 to E4, then he's going to dominate the center of his pawn.
So in order to stop that, black basically has 2 good moves to stop that. One of the most very popular moves is to play knight f6, where black now with the knight on f6 controls e4 and stops white from playing the pawn e4. But the move that Teichmann played was d5, which accomplishes the same thing.
Right.
As control of the e4 square.
Yeah.
All right, so what did Rubinstein do on his second move?
Well, white has a number of choices. He could play the knight on 2 to f3, and that's actually a very non-committal move. I mean, it does attack the e5 square, gives a little extra defense to the e4, but it can go in many different directions from here. This is sort of a non-committal kind of wait and see what happens move.
Okay.
There are moves like the bishop to f4.
Which is known as the London system.
Right.
You know, there's a player, in fact, we just had a tournament at the Washington Chess Club called the Harlow B. Daly Memorial. Harlow Daly was a former New England champion, mass champion. He would play, in fact, he would play d4 as his first move and play bishop f4 in his second move.
And we have players at the club that do that
Yes,
today.
exactly. All right, so he
can't. So now he can't play e2 to e4. Well, it would be a gambit, but that's kind of hard to do.
There is a gambit, yes, where he could play e4.
But he did play the c2 pawn to c4.
And that's a gambit.
That's a gambit.
He's offering the c pawn.
He's offering the c pawn.
Okay, so now black has to make a decision. Do we accept the pawn, the gambit pawn here on c4, or do we decline it? Well, Teichmann decided to decline the gambit. He chose not to take it. And there are two good ways to decline this gambit. One way could be to play the pawn on c7 to c6. This is known as the Slav defense.
Right.
Okay. Again, all these openings have different names. Variation names. But what the Teichmann played was e6, and this is what constitutes what is called the orthodox defense.
Right.
You know who gave the name orthodox defense to the orthodox defense?
No.
As a spoof, it was Dr. Tarrasch, Zygmunt Tarrasch. We mentioned Dr. Tarrasch.
Yeah.
He's the one actually that said, I'm going to call this the orthodox defense. So if you look in the chess books from the past, you'll see that Tarrasch is credited with giving the name orthodox defense. Now, what did Rubinstein play now?
All right. Well, again, he could develop his king's knight. What he chooses to do is to develop the knight on c1 to c3. Having played c4, it gives the c3 square to the knight. Very nice place for it to be.
Okay, so it's time to bring pieces.
Adds pressure to the d5 pawn.
All right, so we have a knight developed by white. So what black does, Teichmann on his third move plays knight f6. So he's going to develop a piece. It's time to bring pieces into play here.
That's the object of the opening. To get pieces out. So what Rubinstein does, he takes the c1 bishop, the dark squared bishop, and he's going to pin the knight against the queen. The knight and the queen are on the same diagonal. That's going to prevent this knight from going anywhere for a while.
Okay. Now, a logical reply to this is to break this pin by playing the bishop to e7. There's nothing wrong with playing the bishop to e7 followed by castling.
Right.
But what Teichmann did was play the knight on b8 to d7. So he chose to defend it with the other knight.
Right.
All right, so he had choices, and he chose this one. All right, Rubinstein.
And again, he could play the knight out to f3. What he does is he plays the pawn on e2 to e3, opens up a diagonal for the white squared bishop, gives a nice strong pawn formation.
Right. Now Teichmann plays a move which he could play previously.
Right.
He now plays bishop e7.
Right. And then the two players are developing their pieces, is what they're doing. And now Rubinstein plays the knight on g1 to f3.
Okay.
So now this is a standard set, very common, thousands of games.
Played, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of games. So what Teichmann did was castle.
Castle.
Yeah.
Again, a logical move.
Right. Okay.
Now this is where Rubinstein, and now there are choices. You can play bishop to d3.
Yes.
You can play the rook to c1.
That's standard.
That's a standard. What Rubinstein does, he plays the queen to c2, puts it on a diagonal, aiming at the h7 pawn, and this is kind of the signature move of what's come to be known as the Rubinstein attack of the orthodox defense to the Queen's Gambit decline.
Okay, so Rubinstein favored this, all right, so what Teichmann did in response to Queen C2, well, he's got a problem. You see, in the Queen's Gambit for black, the light squared bishop.
What's he going to do with it? Where's it going to go?
It's a problem.
Right.
It's blocked. This e6 pawn, the pawn on e6 has it's
going to be a long time before it can go any. Yeah.
So what black Teichmann thinks he can do is develop this bishop another way, he plays b6, the pawn to b6,
Right.
so he can deploy this bishop along the other.
It's plausible. I mean, it makes
plausible.
sense. The recommendation is...
What is the recommendation, though? The recommendation, actually, in this position, would have been to play c5. So not only does it opens up for the queen to come out here,
right,
which is good,
and
yeah.
you know, he can dissolve some of these pawns.
Yes, also dissolve the pawns in the
Right.
center.
And in fact, 4 years after this game, in another Rubinstein-Teichmann game, they reached this identical position, and he did play the recommended move, and it ended in a draw. Yeah, it whittled down to a draw. Yeah.
Okay, but in this game in 1908, in the match, Teichmann played b6. Okay, so what did Rubinstein do now?
Okay, after b6, then he starts the exchange. The c pawn takes the pawn on d5.
All right.
Now it opens up this entire diagonal for
Okay. Now there's two ways to take back that pawn.
Right.
We could take back with the knight taking d5, but that would allow possibility of exchanging pieces.
Yeah.
So what Teichmann does, he recaptures with the e pawn.
Right.
E takes d5.
Okay.
All right. So he chooses that, and also it makes this e file now semi-open.
Right.
So what did Rubinstein do now?
Okay, well, keep an eye on that h7 square. He's going to develop the white squared bishop on f1 to d3. Now he's starting to pile up some pressure on that pawn right
Okay, but as long as that knight is here protecting the pawn on h7, nothing can happen. Now, this bishop, which was hemmed in previously, now you see this diagonal is now open, but he chooses to deploy the bishop. The only move he has with the bishop is to b7.
Right.
He can't go to a6 because the bishop would just be captured.
Yep.
So bishop b7 was Teichmann's ninth move.
Yeah. So now Rubinstein can castle either king side or queen side.
Yep.
And what he chooses to do, he chooses to castle queen side, which is somewhat more rare, I should say, than castling king side. And what it does is it sets a dynamic. When you have these opposite sides castling, it sets a dynamic where black is going to try to run an attack down on the queen side, while white is going to try to run an attack down on the king side. And the saying is that whoever gets there first wins.
Yeah, right. What attack is going to be faster?
Right.
That's the key.
Yeah.
All right. So after Rubinstein castled here, well, now
he plays c5.
Now he plays. He could have played c5 again earlier.
Yeah, 2 years ago in this same position, Teichmann played rook to c8 first and then c5.
Played the rook,
but he lost.
But he lost. Okay.
But he did mount a queenside attack, but he lost.
So here comes c5 by Teichmann now on his 10th move. All right.
So now here comes the start of an attack. This is a good way of starting an attack. He takes the h2 pawn and he plays it to h4.
All right. All right. Now here is where I think we're in agreement. Yeah. Teichmann made a mistake.
Right.
What he should have done here was to capture. He should have taken this pawn on c5 and exchange on d4, which in turn would open up this c file.
Right, and the queen is in front of the king. That's dangerous.
Exactly. So this would have been better for him to do that.
He could have even played a6 and then planned this.
a6 to advance the pawn to b5.
He had a couple of alternatives. Yeah.
But what he did was he played the pawn to c4, which attacks the bishop.
Right, and it looks aggressive.
It looks aggressive. However,
because you don't want to take, but you don't want to bring the thing back.
That would be passive placement of the bishop.
He's got a wonderful square on f5. So not only does he have this diagonal, now he's picked up this diagonal as well. So he's actually been forced to a better square.
Yeah, that is a better square. Okay. So what Teichmann did now was play the rook on f8 to e8. Has no future here.
No.
He goes to e8.
Right.
And now Rubinstein has to make a decision.
Well, yeah. What Rubinstein wants to do is he wants to get that h7 pawn, but it's guarded by the knight.
Right.
By moving the rook to e8, he opens up the fa square for this other knight. The knight on d7 can move back, and now he's going to have plenty of protection for that pawn, and it's going to make it hard to attack. So he decides he's going to eliminate one of those knights. He plays bishop take f6.
Okay. Now Teichmann cannot take back this bishop
because the pawn falls.
Yeah, because the bishop would allow the because this pawn would be taken by the bishop, would check, and he would lose the pawn.
Right.
Yeah. So instead, he's forced now to take knight takes f6, still protects the pawn on h7.
Now,
what is Rubinstein?
Because the bishop was able to move to f5, he's now able to play the pawn on g2 to g4.
And the bishop protects.
It protects the bishop. The bishop protects it. He can't take it with the knight. So this is the start of a pawn storm, or another commentator called it a pawn avalanche.
Okay. So what?
And he also notes that in all this time, nothing has happened on black's queen side.
Nothing, right. He has not even
So forget
started.
the attack. The attack is over here.
The attack is here. The attention is over here.
Right.
So what Teichmann did in response to this, he plays the bishop on e7 to d6.
Right.
Okay.
And what it does is, by doing that, he opens up the file for the rook, and now he has one.
So he can sink the knight into
He has
E.
one defender, two defender, three defender, four. So this knight, once the g4 push comes, it can go here. Otherwise, it'd have to go way back here, and it has no future back there.
Right. It's very passively placed here.
Right.
If it were pushed back there.
So now comes the pawn push,
g5.
and now the knight can come.
And then now knight does sink into e4. Knight e4.
And it interrupts that connection between the queen and the bishop now.
Right.
So
and it's well protected. As you pointed out, we got protection by the pawn, the bishop, and the rook. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So what did Rubinstein do now?
He's going to continue with his pawn attack. He takes the pawn on h4. Now he's moved his pawns up to the 5th rank. He moves to h5. Now the attack is getting closer.
Okay. All right, this is a very difficult position for black, and what Teichmann did in response to h5 is he deploys the queen on d8 to e7, further defending over. He's over defending this knight on e4, but I don't know what his plan is. I mean, is he planning now to? The trouble is he should have been advancing these pawns.
I tended to think that he's going to try to come up with some defense on those 3 pawns in front of the king. If there's some advance, but the queen would be on the same rank and maybe be able to come into that. I don't know.
Yeah, this is hard to
figure.
So what did Rubinstein do?
Okay, well, he's going to. He actually, it would be a mistake to advance the pawns at this point because black could lock them up.
Yes.
Depending on which pawn is moved up, you just block them up.
Especially if the h pawn, moves up, all we do is push the g pawn, and we have created a wall.
That's it. Yeah.
So that would be a mistake.
Yeah. So he doesn't want to.
And the same thing with pushing this way. We still put h6, and we created a wall.
Yeah.
So it would be a mistake to advance these pawns.
But what he does, he's looking for a way to build up the pressure. This rook on d1,
has no future
it's all blocked. Yeah, it's all blocked up. So he moves it over to g1, directly across from the king now. So.
All right. So now Teichmann plays the pawn on a7 to a6, something that he should have been doing earlier in the game, advancing these pawns, because the idea is to advance this pawn to b4, b5, b4. But he's played a6 to support the advance of the b pawn.
So, like I said, this knight has blocked the connection between the queen and the bishop. But Rubinstein decides he can still take that pawn. He's going to sacrifice his bishop and play bishop take pawn on h7, check.
Well, this is beautiful because how many players you know would play something like this?
You have to be really sure it's going to work.
You'd have to be a top-notch player who has calculated the consequences of sacrificing a bishop
for a pawn.
For a pawn. So what Teichmann did is accept the sacrifice. Now he could have declined the sacrifice, but he's lost the pawn here. So he wants Rubinstein to show him how is it possible that this is a sound sacrifice. So he accepts the sacrifice. King takes h7. He's a piece ahead now. A bishop ahead.
So now he takes his g-pawn, advances it to g6, check.
Right. Now here is where Teichmann realizes he cannot recapture this pawn on g6 with the f-pawn because the h-pawn would take back with check, and the poor king would be here. This is very dangerous. So he chooses to play the king back. He thinks, okay, he'll play king g8 is his move. Okay, so now what comes?
Well, now Rubinstein decides he's going to exchange this knight. There are some commentators said there were other moves he could have done, but he gets rid of this. Because that was a strong knight sitting in the center there.
Okay. Now, there's 2 ways to take this knight back. Let's show our viewers what is wrong with taking with the queen. If we were to take, let's focus on the board here. Queen takes e4 would allow first this
G takes
f7 check. And he's now attacking. Now, if the king were to recapture here, then we have
knight to g5 check,
forking and winning the queen.
Right.
All right. So that's why the queen would not be able to take the pawn here. So let's put the knight back.
Right.
So that forces black to take back with the pawn.
Right.
Cannot take with the queen because it'll cost him the queen. So he plays d takes e4. Now this pawn is attacking the knight.
But
Yeah.
you know, Rubinstein has bigger threats. He's
Right.
going to move the pawn on h5 now to h6.
Okay, this is very dangerous. Now,
Because the rooks are behind them. Once
right.
these files open up, there's mating threats.
all right, what Teichmann did in response to this, he's not going to take any of these pawns here. He advances the pawn to f7 to f6,
Right.
and thinks he can defend here.
Yeah.
If there's,
That he
if
might
there's
be able
any
to wiggle
reca-
out somehow.
He may be able to wiggle out of this.
Okay.
All right. So what did the Rubinstein do
Right.
now?
Well, he's got rooks in strong places. He's going to play the h pawn takes the g7 pawn, opens up this h file.
Okay, so he took there. Wow, this is rather interesting here. All right, so what happened here is that Teichmann, now he could have taken here. I mean, yeah, but that could be dangerous here, especially with this open h file. He actually takes the other piece. There's another piece undefended.
Right.
He said, okay, I'm going to win another piece. So e takes f3. He's now 2 pieces ahead.
Right.
But here's what's wrong with this.
Okay, the rook, now that the h file is open,
Yes.
plays the rook on h1 to h8, check.
He only has one move. He must take the only move he has is king takes
Right, king has to take the
g7,
pawn.
has to take that.
Now the rook comes back to h7, check.
Okay.
Can't take the pawn because it's covered.
All right. So he moves back. The king moves the g8. Now, I know a lot of players in this position
Would
if you-
snap up that queen
Would,
in a minute.
would immediately snap up the queen
Right.
and say, "Okay, I won the queen."
Right.
But not Rubinstein.
No, he takes the queen and plays it to f5. He puts it in a stronger position, adds more pressure. He says, "Go ahead." He says, "You know,
Okay.
he can take the queen, can take the rook, and the pawn takes, and it's going to be mate. in
Exactly.
another
He's
move.
still White is still threatening the queen
Right.
here. Yeah. And so what? I'm amused by Teichmann's next move because instead of moving the queen, because what can he do?
What's he going to do?
What can he do?
Because
Actually,
queen, you know, if he goes back here, then this queen check here can become a mate.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
So what he did? This is Teichmann's move.
Right.
He plays c3.
Three.
What is he going to do here? I mean, he's threatening to
Does he
take
take
with check.
something scary?
Maybe he was able to get his first check of the game. And
You're right.
If he can do
So
it.
now he takes the rook. I mean, queen rather. Rook takes
Right.
queen on e7.
Rook takes queen. Now
And then
here.
this is where he resigned.
Now, why did he resign? I mean, why can't he just simply? All right, there's two ways to take this rook.
Right.
back. Let's take, for example, let's take with the bishop. Bishop takes here.
Okay, the
e7.
bishop takes here. He can just the queen goes to
Yes.
e6. Check.
Okay. And we can't go to the 8. Well, we can go.
You can go there,
If we went
sure.
here, this would be a big mistake, would it not?
Sure, because he can just simply do this, right?
Check. Yeah. Exactly. And the king is forced to
Go up
g7.
there, and then it's mate.
Then it's mate. All right. All right. But let's, for example,
take with the rook.
let's take it with the rook then. Okay. So we got to take. Let's take it now with the rook. Rook takes.
Is
e7.
the bishop here?
And the bishop's here, right? All right. If we go here, now we got this. Now the queen is threatening not only the undefended bishop,
Right.
but the big threat
Is
is
to
to
move
play
the
the rook
rook
to
over
h1
with
and
mate
bring with
on
mate down here.
Right.
Yes. So that's why Teichmann resigned in this position.
And there's no real way to block it. I mean,
Right. So let's set up the final position here. The final position was the pawn here. Yeah, right. He had actually right, and the rook is right here, right?
right. He had
Okay.
just taken the queen. And
This is the final position. This
Right.
is what 26 moves. This
Yep,
is a 26
26
move
move.
game. So this is an example of Rubinstein's play. In fact, you know, he loved the Queen's Gambit.
Oh
In
yeah,
fact,
that was his favorite.
There were more Queen's Gambit played by him, and as I say, you know. It's interesting. He has a very interesting history. If people were to Google the name Akiba Rubinstein, go to Google, type in Akiba Rubinstein, put in the word chess, you find so much material about his, not only his chess career, but his life.
It's time to wrap up.
Yeah, and as I say, I think I would recommend people to go and check out Akiba Rubinstein on Google. Well, chess fans, we hope you enjoyed the game that Marty and I presented to you. Now, we got a big event coming to Leominster Labor Day weekend. We got the New England Open Labor Day weekend at the Doubletree by Hilton. We hope to do a program on the New England Open, probably in October, after the New England Open is open. But we want you to stay tuned for the next edition of Chess Chat. We got another interesting show for you, and we want you to be here to watch this program. See you next time.